You'd think sleeping with your former boss would make him stop calling you kid. Guess what? It doesn't. It's been 3 years since I left the internship program at Stonebridge Architecture, and yet, the moment I walked back into the firm as a full-time architect, he was still there. Daniel Reed, the man who taught me everything about design, discipline, and how to make a cup of coffee strong enough to survive an all-nighter. I thought time and distance would change things. But apparently, for Daniel, I'm still just his intern. When I first saw him again, he was leaning over a conference table, sleeves rolled up, blueprints spread out like a battlefield. Same calm authority. Same steady voice that made every word sound like law. But when his eyes met mine, those sharp gray eyes that used to glance over my sketches with surgical precision, they softened, just for a second. Then he smirked. Well, look who finally grew up. Still drawing on napkins. Kid. My chest burned. That one word did 3 years of trying to become his equal. But I smiled anyway. Only when I'm bored in your meetings. The team laughed. Daniel didn't. His gaze lingered a moment too long, like he was dissecting me again, piece by piece, trying to see if the boy he once mentored had actually become a man. That night I couldn't sleep. The city was too alive, my thoughts too loud. I remembered every late night from 3 years ago, coffee cups piling up, paper scattered everywhere, and his voice guiding me through design principles while I secretly memorized the way his fingers moved across a page. He was my mentor, my hero, and my biggest heartbreak all in one. And now, fate had decided to put us in the same office again. The next morning, Daniel called me into his office. I half expected a welcome aboard chat. Instead, he slid a folder across his desk without looking up. This is the Stevenson project. You'll be assisting me again. I blinked. Assisting? He finally looked up, his lips twitching with that same familiar half-smile. Don't look so disappointed, kid. It's an important project. You'll learn a lot. There it was again. Kid. I wanted to say I'm not that kid anymore, Daniel, but the words stuck in my throat. So I just nodded, grabbed the folder, and left before he could see the way my hands were shaking. Over the next few weeks, we fell back into a rhythm that felt almost too easy. Late nights at the office, coffee runs, arguments over design concepts that always ended with one of us grudgingly saying, "You're right." Only this time, the tension was different. It wasn't just professional, it was electric. When his hand brushed mine over a blueprint, my breath caught. When he leaned too close, explaining some technical detail, my pulse quickened. And sometimes, just sometimes, I caught him staring back. But he never said anything. And neither did I. One night, we stayed late working on the Stevenson model. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, the city humming outside the windows. Daniel leaned over the model, inspecting a miniature terrace. "You rushed this part," he said quietly. I frowned. "No, I didn't. It's supposed to be minimalist." "Minimalist doesn't mean lazy." That stung. "I wasn't lazy." He straightened, crossing his arms. "You were when you were my intern, too." Something inside me snapped. "I'm not your intern anymore." He froze. The air between us tightened, thick with unspoken history. "I know," he said finally, voice low, "but sometimes it's hard to forget the way things were." I stepped closer. "Then maybe you should try." Our eyes met, and for the first time he didn't look away. The silence stretched. The hum of the city faded. Then, almost imperceptibly, Daniel's gaze dropped to my lips. My heart pounded. I wanted to say something, anything, but before I could, he turned away. "Go home, kid," he murmured. I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and left, slamming the door harder than I meant to. Over the next few days, he barely spoke to me. He delegated tasks through emails, avoided eye contact during meetings, pretended nothing had happened. It drove me insane. One night, after too many drinks at a bar with coworkers, I sent him a text. "You really can't stop calling me that, huh, kid?" No reply. The next morning, he called me into his office again. When I walked in, his phone was on the desk, my text still visible on the screen. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, softly, "Why does it bother you so much?" I laughed, but it came out bitter. Because I'm not your student anymore. I'm your equal. He stood, closing the distance between us in 2 slow steps. His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes gave him away. I never said you weren't. Then stop treating me like what? He asked, leaning in. Like someone I still care about? My breath caught. He froze then, realizing what he'd just said. I stared at him. You still? But he didn't answer. He just turned toward the window, jaw tightening. I shouldn't have said that. Daniel, I whispered. Look at me. He didn't. Look at me, damn it. When he finally did, his eyes were glassy, filled with something between guilt and longing. I spent years trying not to. That was the moment everything broke. The walls, the professionalism, the silence, who both let it shatter. He kissed me, desperately, clumsily, like a man drowning. And for the first time in 3 years, I let myself kiss him back. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't planned. It was everything we'd been holding in, all the missed chances, the stolen glances, the sleepless nights. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. I shouldn't have done that, he whispered. Yeah, I said, breathless. But you did. He laughed softly, that rare, real laugh that reached his eyes. You always did have a smart mouth, kid. I smiled through the ache. Then stop calling me that. He hesitated, and for a second, I thought he might finally say my name instead. But he didn't. He just looked at me like he wanted to but couldn't. Then he whispered, Go home. That night, I stood alone on the subway platform, my lips still tingling from his kiss. The city roared around me, alive and indifferent, and I realized something terrifying. No matter how much I tried to grow up, no matter how far I ran, a part of me would always be his kid. I avoided him for a week, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Every time I saw him, every time his voice carried down the hall, something in me twisted. That kiss, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a confession, one we both refused to acknowledge. So I buried myself in work, stayed late at my desk, left meetings before he could corner me, pretended that the air between us wasn't suffocating. But Daniel Reed was the kind of man who didn't let things stay unresolved. By the 8th day, he showed up at my cubicle, leaning against the divider with his usual maddening calm. You've been avoiding me. I didn't even look up. I've been busy. With what? I pointed at the blueprints in front of me, trying to fix the Stevenson model you criticized. He smirked faintly. You took that personally, huh? Only because I was right. He crossed his arms, watching me for a moment. You always think you're right, kid. Stop calling me that. I snapped before I could stop myself. The words came out too sharp, too raw. He blinked, caught off guard by the edge in my voice. Ethan, no, I said, standing up, meeting his gaze for the first time in days. You don't get to do that. You don't get to kiss me and then act like I'm still some intern you can pat on the head. His jaw tightened. You think this is easy for me? Then stop pretending it's nothing. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel Reed, the man who always had a plan, looked lost. After a long silence, he finally said, Come to my office after work. Why? Because we need to talk. The office emptied out at 7, but I stayed until nearly 9, staring at the glowing cursor on my monitor, trying to convince myself not to go. When I finally walked into his office, the city lights spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting him in silver and shadow. He was standing by the window again, hands in his pockets. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, the collar undone. He looked tired, human. I didn't plan for that kiss, he said without turning around. And I didn't plan for you to come back into my life either. Then why did you make me your assistant again? I asked quietly. Because you're good, he said simply. Better than you were before. Better than most people here. Then treat me like it. He turned then, and the look in his eyes made my chest ache. You think I don't? I laughed bitterly. You still call me kid. He sighed. Old habits die hard. Or maybe you just don't want to see me as anything else. The silence between us thickened. Then, almost imperceptibly, he said, "When you left 3 years ago, I thought that was it. That I'd done my job, trained you, taught you what you needed, sent you out into the world. But when you walked back in last month," his voice cracked slightly, "it felt like a mistake I wasn't ready to make again." "A mistake," I whispered. He met my eyes. "You were my intern, Ethan. You trusted me. You looked at me like I hung the damn moon." And he stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I should have kept my distance. You deserved better than to fall for someone who couldn't give you what you wanted back then." I stepped closer. "And what about now?" He didn't move. "Now it's worse. Because I want to." I didn't remember crossing the room. Only that one moment I was standing across from him, and the next, his breath was ghosting over mine. This time I kissed him first. It wasn't desperate like before, it was deliberate. Slow. The kind of kiss that asks a question instead of demanding an answer. When we broke apart, Daniel rested his forehead against mine. "You shouldn't," he murmured. "Too late," I whispered. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You really haven't changed. Neither have you." And maybe that was the problem. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and careful distance. A brush of hands while passing blueprints. A shared cab ride after a late meeting. A look across the conference table that lingered too long. No one in the office suspected anything. To everyone else, Daniel was still the composed senior architect, and I was just the young designer trying to prove myself. But beneath the surface, something dangerous was building, something fragile and consuming. We tried to set rules. No touching at work. No staying over. No talking about the future. But rules are easy to write and impossible to follow. One night, after another brutal client deadline, we ended up at his place. The moment the door shut, all the restraint we'd practiced dissolved. His apartment was just like him, minimalist, quiet, controlled. But the way he kissed me that night was anything but controlled. He pulled me close, his hands gripping my shirt like he was terrified I'd disappear. "You drive me crazy," he whispered against my lips. "Good," I said, breathless. "You deserve it." He laughed, a deep, genuine sound I hadn't heard in years. We ended up on his couch, tangled in half-whispered apologies and promises neither of us could keep. When the morning light crept through the blinds, I woke to find him watching me quietly. "You're still here," he said softly. "Should I not be?" He shook his head. "No. I just didn't think I'd get to see this again." Something in his voice broke me. Because for all his confidence, all his authority, Daniel looked scared. So I reached out and took his hand. "Then don't push me away this time." But of course, reality doesn't stay gentle for long. 2 weeks later, the rumor started. Someone in the office mentioned seeing us leave together late at night. Another noticed the way his eyes followed me during meetings. By Friday, it was all over the firm, whispers, side glances, quiet speculation. I could handle gossip, but Daniel couldn't. He called me into his office again that evening, his expression unreadable. "Close the door," he said. My stomach sank. "Is this about the rumors?" He didn't answer right away. "We need to end this." The words hit like a punch. "What?" "You know how this looks, Ethan. I'm your supervisor. People talk. I don't care what they say." "Well, I do." The way he said it, cold, distant, cut deeper than I expected. "So what? You're choosing your reputation over me?" "I'm choosing what's right." "Right for who?" "For both of us." I laughed bitterly. "Don't pretend this is about me. You're scared, Daniel. You've always been scared." His jaw clenched. "You think this is easy? I've spent my entire career building something I can't afford to lose. And what about me? You don't think I'm risking anything?" "This isn't about risk. It's about responsibility." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You just don't want to admit that you love me." The silence that followed was deafening. He looked at me, then really looked, and for a moment I thought he might finally say it. But he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Please, just go." I stared at him, my chest aching. "Say it, Daniel. Say you don't feel anything, and I'll walk away." He didn't, so I did. The next few days were agony. He avoided me completely, messages, no meetings, no late nights. I was reassigned to another project, working under someone else. Every time I passed his office, I felt that same hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't supposed to end like that. Not with silence. Not with cowardice. Then, one night, I found myself back at the studio after everyone had gone home. The Stevenson model sat in the center of the room, half finished. I stared at it for a long time, remembering all the nights we'd spent working side by side, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet hum of connection. And before I knew it, I was sketching again, pouring every ounce of frustration, longing, and love into that unfinished model. I didn't notice him until I heard his voice behind me. "You still draw on napkins, huh?" I froze. Daniel was standing at the door, hands in his pockets, watching me. He looked exhausted but softer, somehow. Human again. "Old habits," I said quietly. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "I missed this." "What? Watching me work?" "No," he said, his voice low. "Being near you." I turned, meeting his gaze. "Then why did you—" "Because I was scared," he said before I could finish. "Of what people would think. Of what I might lose. But the truth is, I already lost something worse." I swallowed hard. "What's that?" "You." He took a step closer. Then another. "I can't promise this will be easy," he said quietly. "We'll get judged. Maybe even punished. But if you're still willing." I didn't let him finish. I closed the distance and kissed him. It wasn't fire this time, it was gravity. When we broke apart, I whispered, "You're really bad at letting go. You know that?" He smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting the way it used to when he was trying not to laugh. "So are you, kid." I rolled my eyes, but my heart swelled anyway. "Still calling me that?" He smirked. "Some habits are worth keeping." The next morning, everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because we had finally stopped pretending. When I walked into the office, Daniel was already there, talking with the senior partners. His posture was still confident, his tone measured, but there was a quiet ease in him now, like a man who had finally decided to stop fighting himself. When our eyes met across the room, something passed between us. A small nod, a silent understanding. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't loud. But it was real. For the next few weeks, we worked like two people trying to rebuild something fragile. No more stolen kisses in the dark. No more whispered apologies. Just honesty. We talked more, not just about work, but about life. About why he'd built walls so high around himself. About why I'd spent so long trying to tear mine down. He told me about his first few years at the firm. About the pressure to be perfect. The sacrifices he'd made. The loneliness he'd buried under late nights and clean blueprints. I thought love was something that got in the way. He admitted one night as we stood by the office window watching the rain. Something that made you weak. "And now?" I asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "Now I think it's the only thing that makes me human." The rumor mill didn't stop, of course. People always talk. One morning, while grabbing coffee in the break room, I overheard two coworkers whispering. I heard Reed's mentoring another one of his favorites. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're young and good-looking." Their laughter stung. But before I could say anything, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Funny," Daniel said as he stepped into the room, his tone calm but sharp. "Because last I checked, talent isn't something you can flirt your way into." The room went silent. He set his coffee down beside mine, turned to the two men and said evenly, "You can question my leadership, but don't you dare question his work ethic." Then he looked at me, just a brief glance, but it was enough to make my throat tighten. He didn't care anymore who saw. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. A month later, the Stevenson project was finally complete. We'd poured every ounce of effort, emotion, and sleepless night into it. It wasn't just a building, it was our story carved in steel and glass. The firm decided to unveil the design at an exhibition gala downtown. That night, I arrived early, wearing the only suit that didn't make me look like a teenager pretending to be an adult. The gallery was stunning, walls lined with architectural models, renderings illuminated by soft golden light. The air buzzed with polite chatter and champagne glasses. Then I saw him, Daniel. He was standing near the display, talking to one of the partners. His suit fit him perfectly tailored, sharp, intimidatingly elegant. But when he saw me, his expression softened instantly. "You clean up well," he said as I approached. "So do you," I replied, trying not to stare too long. He leaned in slightly. "Remember to breathe, kid." I shot him a look. "Really?" He smirked. "It's tradition now." Before I could roll my eyes again, the partner announced the start of the presentation. Daniel walked up first, speaking about the design philosophy, the balance of form and function, the inspiration from urban renewal, the concept of resilience through structure. His words were measured, precise, professional. Then he paused, glanced toward me, and said, "But no project is ever the work of one man. It's collaboration that makes architecture real. It's about trust, about learning from one another." He nodded subtly in my direction. This one especially. A few heads turned. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium with shaking hands. The lights were bright, the crowd impossibly silent. "I used to be an intern here," I began, earning a few polite chuckles. "And I thought I knew everything. Turns out, I didn't even know how much I didn't know." Some people smiled. Daniel's lips twitched. "But I learned that great design isn't about perfection. It's about connection. Between people, between ideas, between what's built and who builds it. Our project taught me that the best things we create are the ones that change us in return." When I stepped off the stage, Daniel was waiting near the edge, clapping quietly. And when our eyes met, I saw it again, that same mix of pride and tenderness that had been there since the beginning. Except this time it wasn't hidden. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the soft jazz music drifted through the hall, we found ourselves outside on the balcony. The city stretched before us, lights shimmering like stars scattered across the skyline. "It's beautiful," I murmured. "It is," Daniel said. Then softer, "So are you." I turned to him, surprised by the bluntness of it. Daniel Reed didn't do unfiltered emotion, but he was looking at me with that same open, vulnerable expression I'd only ever seen in fleeting moments after long nights, whispered arguments, stolen kisses. "Daniel." He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. "I've spent too long pretending this isn't what I want." The city fell away. The music, the voices, the noise, all of it faded. I felt his hand slide into mine, his fingers warm, certain. "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore," he said quietly. "Let them talk. Let them judge. I'm done hiding." I smiled through the sting of tears. "You sure you're ready for that?" He laughed softly. "I've been ready for years. I just needed you to remind me." We didn't kiss then. We didn't need to. We just stood there, the two of us, looking out at the city we'd both built our lives in. Two architects, two stubborn hearts, finally learning that love doesn't have to fit into blueprints or timelines. Sometimes it just finds a way. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to its rhythm. But something had changed, not just between us, but in how we moved through the world. We no longer flinched at being seen together. Lunch breaks became normal. Morning coffee runs, shared cab rides, quiet smiles and crowded elevators, all of it part of a new routine that didn't need to be secret anymore. The gossip faded, as gossip always does. People stopped whispering, stopped guessing. Eventually, they just accepted it. And maybe that was the quiet revolution of it all, not that we'd fallen in love, but that we'd refused to apologize for it. One afternoon, as we packed up after a long meeting, Daniel handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "New project proposal. Thought we could co-lead it." I blinked. "You're serious?" He grinned. "You think I'm giving you an easy ride just because you're sleeping with me?" I gaped. "Daniel." He laughed, the sound echoing through the empty office. "Relax, no one's here." I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "You're unbelievable." He leaned in, his voice low. "You love that about me." I rolled my eyes, but the truth was hopeless denying it anymore. Yeah, I said softly. I do. That night, we walked out of the building together. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the city humming around us. As we reached the corner, Daniel stopped, glancing down the street where the lights glimmered off the wet pavement. You know, he said, you never really stopped being my intern. I groaned. Daniel, he smirked. Just, not in the way you think. I laughed, shoving his shoulder lightly. You're insufferable. He caught my hand before I could pull away. But you still love me, right? I smiled. Unfortunately, yes. We walked home hand in hand, the city lights dancing above us, our reflections merging in the glass of every building we passed. For the first time, it didn't matter who saw. We weren't hiding anymore. We weren't teacher and student, boss and intern, or mentor and protege. We were just us. Two men who found each other in the chaos of deadlines and design drafts, who learned that love doesn't need permission, it just needs courage. Months later, the Stevenson building opened to the public. On the first morning, as the sun rose over the polished glass facade, we stood together outside, coffee cups in hand. Daniel looked at the building, then at me. You know, he said quietly, I think this might be my favorite project yet. Yeah, he nodded. Because it's the first one that feels like home. I smiled, leaning my shoulder against his. You're getting sentimental, old man. He chuckled. You're still a pain in the ass, kid. Still calling me that? He glanced at me, eyes soft. Always. And this time it didn't sting. It just felt right. Because now, kid didn't mean less than. It meant ours. It meant every late night, every argument, every kiss that made the world make sense again. It meant love, real, imperfect, quietly defiant love. And as the morning light spilled across the glass, reflecting in both our eyes, I realized something simple but true sometimes. The person who once taught you how to build things is the same person who teaches you how to believe again. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.